If people start hating you for no reason, let me tell you something gentle and fierce at the same time. The storm you feel is not always about the sky you're standing under. Sometimes it is about the weather they carry inside their own chests. You may be walking in your quiet truth, minding your ordinary business, breathing in the day the way it comes, when suddenly you notice the air around you turn sharp, smiles grow thin, voices grow cold, eyes that once met yours now slide away or narrow with a judgment you never asked for and never earned. And you wonder, late at night when the world is finally still, what you did wrong. You turn your life over in your hands, searching for a crack, a stain, a careless word. But often, there is no crime. There is only your existence, standing honest and unashamed, reflecting something they are not ready to see. There are people who do not hate you, not truly. They hate the reminder you bring. You remind them of roads they did not take, courage they did not summon, kindness they did not give themselves permission to show. Your presence is a mirror, and mirrors can be cruel to those who are avoiding their own reflection. You walk with your head up, not because you are perfect, but because you decided long ago that shame would not be your permanent posture. And that alone can feel like an insult to someone who has spent years bending their spine to fit into a smaller life. Some people are unsettled by peace. They are used to noise, used to chaos, used to measuring their worth by struggle and comparison. When you choose calm, when you refuse to be dragged into every argument, when you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, it can look like arrogance to those who confuse dignity with pride. But dignity is quiet. It does not shout. It does not compete. It simply stands. And standing can feel threatening to someone who has learned to survive only by pushing others down. You see, hatred often grows where honesty lives. Not the loud, cutting honesty that wounds for sport, but the steady honesty of a person who knows who they are and does not apologize for it. When you stop shrinking, when you stop laughing at jokes that bruise your spirit, when you stop pretending to agree just to keep the peace, you disrupt an unspoken agreement. You break the contract that says you will stay small so others can feel tall. And for that, some will punish you with silence, with gossip, with cold shoulders and sharp looks. They will call it attitude. They will call it change. They will call it anything except what it really is, your growth. There are also those who hate you because you did not save them. You did not fix their wounds. You did not carry their pain on your back forever. You loved them, perhaps deeply, but you learned that love does not mean self-destruction. When you finally put the burden down, when you choose to breathe for yourself, they feel abandoned. Not because you wronged them, but because they built a home in your sacrifice. And when you moved out, they were left alone with the mess they refused to clean. Jealousy is another quiet architect of hatred. It does not always announce itself with green eyes and clenched fists. Sometimes it wears the mask of concern. Sometimes it sounds like advice you did not ask for. Sometimes it shows up as jokes made at your expense, disguised as humor so no one can call it cruelty. They watch your light and wonder why theirs feels dim. They watch you take steps forward, even when your knees shake, and instead of asking how, they decide you must not deserve it. It is easier to believe that your success is fake than to admit they are afraid to try. Understand this. When people hate you for no reason, it is often because you refuse to play a role they assigned you. You were supposed to be the quiet one, the grateful one, the one who stayed behind. You were supposed to need their approval, their permission, their validation. But you learned to clap for yourself in empty rooms. You learned to speak your own name with respect. And that kind of independence is terrifying to those who rely on control to feel safe. There will be days when this hatred feels heavy. Days when it follows you into your work, your home, your prayers. Days when you question whether being yourself is worth the loneliness that sometimes comes with it. On those days, remember, not everyone is meant to come with you. Some people are chapters, not the whole book. Some people are lessons, not lifelong companions. Their inability to love you is not proof that you are unlovable. It is proof that they have limits, and you have reached them. You do not have to harden your heart in response. Hatred tries to recruit you into its own smallness. It wants you bitter, suspicious, sharp-edged. But you can refuse the invitation. You can stay soft without being weak. You can stay kind without being foolish. Kindness does not mean allowing disrespect. It means choosing not to let someone else's poison become your blood. Protect your spirit. Not by building walls so high no one can reach you, but by choosing carefully who gets access. Everyone does not deserve your story. Everyone does not deserve your energy. You are allowed to step back, to create distance, to say no without explanation. Boundaries are not punishments. They are acts of self-respect. And self-respect will always offend those who benefited from your self-neglect. When people hate you for no reason, it can also be because you are changing. Growth makes noise even when it is quiet. Old dynamics begin to crack. Familiar patterns no longer work. You stop responding the way you used to. You stop reacting on command. You pause. You think. You choose. And suddenly you are called distant, cold, difficult. But what they really mean is that you are no longer predictable. You are no longer easy to manipulate. You are no longer available for every emotional demand. Let them misunderstand you. Clarity is a gift, not an obligation. You do not owe everyone an explanation for your healing. You do not owe everyone a front row seat to your becoming. Some people will never understand the version of you that was born after pain taught you how to survive. And that is okay. Understanding is not required for respect, and respect is not required for you to continue living your truth. There is a strange freedom that comes when you accept that not everyone will like you. It loosens the grip of approval. It teaches you to measure your life by your own values, not by applause. You begin to ask better questions. Am I being honest? Am I being fair? Am I being kind to myself? When those answers are yes, the noise of other people's opinions starts to fade. Not disappear, but soften, like thunder moving farther away. Sometimes the hatred comes because you carry hope. You believe in tomorrow even when today is heavy. You speak of possibility in rooms addicted to despair. You talk about healing where others have made a home in their wounds. Hope can feel offensive to those who have given up. It shines a light they did not ask for, and instead of stepping into it, they try to blow it out. Do not dim yourself to make others comfortable. The world has enough shadows. Your light is not too much, it is necessary. And yes, light attracts insects as well as admirers. That is the risk of shining. But it is still better than living in the dark, pretending you cannot see your own brilliance. If people start hating you for no reason, do not rush to fix it. Sit with it. Learn from it. Ask yourself what this moment is teaching you about boundaries, about courage, about self-worth. Sometimes hatred is a sign that you are standing at the edge of a new season. The old ground is shaking because it cannot hold who you are becoming. You are not here to be liked by everyone. You are here to be whole. You are here to live a life that feels honest in your bones, a life where you can lay your head down at night and recognize yourself in the dark. Let them talk. Let them judge. Let them misunderstand. Their words cannot undo the work you have done to heal, to grow, to rise. In the end, the people who truly see you will not need reasons to love you. They will feel it in the way your presence makes room for truth. And the ones who hate you for no reason will slowly fade into the background, their noise losing power as you keep walking forward, steady and unashamed, carrying your life like something precious, because it is. Your growth unsettles people who benefited from your silence, because silence is not always innocent. Sometimes it is an unspoken agreement you never signed but were expected to honor anyway. When you stayed quiet, you were convenient. When you didn't question, you were manageable. When you swallowed discomfort and called it patience, you made life easier for others. Your silence gave them space to speak over you, decide for you, step beyond your limits without resistance. And now that you have learned to speak, now that you listen to your own voice with respect, the same people who felt comfortable around you begin to feel restless. Growth does not announce itself loudly, but it changes everything it touches. It shows up in the way you pause before answering, in the way you say no without apology, in the way your eyes no longer drop when someone crosses a line. You no longer carry every burden as if it were your duty, no longer absorb blame just to keep peace, no longer explain yourself into exhaustion. This quiet shift disturbs those who were used to your compliance. They are not bothered by your happiness. They are bothered by the loss of control they once had. When you were silent, your pain could be ignored. When you speak, truth enters the room, and truth is uncomfortable for those who were gaining something from your silence. Your growth becomes a mirror, reflecting behaviors they never had to confront before. They don't see your healing, they see their advantage slipping away. So they rename your strength as attitude, your boundaries as coldness, your self-respect as arrogance. It is easier to criticize your change than to admit they preferred you wounded. Silence can become a kind of servitude, especially for those who enjoy giving orders without accountability. The moment you step out of that role, you disrupt a system that worked in their favor. A system where you gave and they took, where you listened and they spoke, where you endured and they overstepped. As balance begins to shift, discomfort follows. Change always frightens those who have grown comfortable benefiting from imbalance. Your growth also weakens their excuses. When you rise despite your circumstances, when you move forward carrying old scars with grace, it leaves little room for their justifications to stay small. Your silence once validated their stagnation. Your movement now questions it. And instead of asking how you did it, they question your intentions. They dissect your progress, search for flaws in your success, minimize your effort, because acknowledging your growth would require them to face their own inaction. Those who benefit from silence often forget that silence has a breaking point. Every person reaches a moment when carrying everything becomes heavier than speaking up. Your moment arrived, and that is why they are unsettled. They expected you to remain the same, to stay accommodating, to absorb discomfort so they would never have to change. Your voice disrupts that expectation. Your growth reminds them that they are responsible for their own lives. You are no longer their emotional shelter, their excuse, their shield from consequences. And that realization is deeply uncomfortable for people who have leaned on others to avoid accountability. Instead of adjusting, they assign blame, hoping it will free them from facing themselves. When you were silent, you were underestimated. When you speak, you are suddenly seen as a threat. Because a person who speaks asks questions, and questions disturb structures built on obedience. Your growth reaches beyond you. It sends a message that transformation is possible, that strength can be chosen, that silence is not the only way to survive. And that message unsettles those who feel safest when others remain still. Your growth is not rebellion, but to those who benefited from your silence, it feels like one. They want you to pause, to look back, to explain, to apologize for changing. But your forward movement is your response. Your growth unsettles them because deep down they know that if you could change, they could have too. And that realization is often the most uncomfortable truth of all. Your silence was a comfortable place for them, but your voice has become a test, and tests are never welcomed by those who are used to gaining without effort. Change breaks old agreements without warning, because many of the contracts that shape our lives were never written, never spoken aloud, never consciously chosen. They were formed in silence, in habit, in repetition. You became a certain version of yourself to survive, to belong, to be loved, and people adjusted their expectations around that version. They learned what they could ask of you, what they could take, how far they could go. Over time, those expectations hardened into agreements, even though you never consented to them with clarity or freedom. And when you change, those invisible contracts begin to crack. Change does not knock before entering. It does not announce that it is about to rearrange the furniture of your life. It comes quietly at first, as discomfort, as fatigue, as a sense that something no longer fits. You start noticing the weight of things you once carried without complaint. You begin to question patterns that once felt normal. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you start moving differently. That movement alone is enough to break old agreements, because those agreements depended on your stillness. People often believe stability means permanence, but much of what we call stability is simply familiarity. Old agreements survive not because they are healthy, but because they are known. When you change, you disturb the familiar. You stop responding the way you used to. You hesitate where you once complied. You choose yourself in moments where you once disappeared. And suddenly, people feel blindsided, as if you violated a rule they thought was permanent. What makes change feel threatening is not just that it alters behavior, but that it removes predictability. Old agreements rely on knowing who you will be, how you will react, what you will tolerate. When you grow, that certainty dissolves. The version of you that was easy to anticipate no longer exists in the same way. And for those who built comfort, control, or advantage around your predictability, this feels like betrayal. There is often anger when old agreements break, even if those agreements were unfair. People say you have changed as if change were a crime, as if growth were a personal attack. They remember the version of you who said yes more easily, who waited longer, who explained more, who endured quietly. They feel entitled to that version because it served them. They forget that it cost you something to remain that way. Change exposes how much your past behavior was shaped by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood. When that fear loosens its grip, your actions begin to shift. You no longer negotiate your worth in every interaction. You no longer accept discomfort as the price of connection. And without intending to, you dismantle agreements that were built on your fear rather than your truth. Old agreements rarely survive honesty. They depend on unspoken rules like don't challenge me, don't outgrow me, don't need more than I'm willing to give. When you change, you start violating these rules simply by being more present in your own life. You start asking questions that were never meant to be asked. You start choosing rest over obligation, clarity over politeness, self-respect over approval. People often demand explanations when you change, as if understanding could restore the old order. But change does not always come with language. Sometimes you cannot fully explain why you are different, only that you are. You feel it in your body, in your breath, in the way your spirit resists returning to old shapes. And no amount of explanation can make someone comfortable with a change that removes their advantage. Change also reveals which relationships were built on mutual growth and which were built on imbalance. Some connections adapt. They stretch, just make room for the new version of you. Others fracture immediately because their foundation was never meant to support equality. When old agreements break, it becomes clear who was walking beside you and who was standing on you. There is grief in breaking old agreements, even necessary ones. You mourn the ease of being understood without effort, the comfort of routine, the safety of knowing what to expect. Change can make you feel like a stranger in rooms where you once felt at home. But that discomfort is not a sign you are wrong. It is a sign you are no longer pretending. Change forces people to renegotiate their place in your life, and not everyone is willing to do that work. Renegotiation requires humility, flexibility, and self-reflection. It requires admitting that the old way may have been convenient, but not fair. Many people would rather accuse you of changing than examine how they benefited from who you used to be. Old agreements often break without warning because change itself is cumulative. One small decision builds on another. One boundary leads to another. One moment of choosing yourself creates momentum. From the outside it looks sudden. From the inside it feels overdue. And when the break finally happens, it is not an explosion but a release. Change does not ask for permission, because permission was never given to you when the agreements were formed. You were expected to adapt, to adjust, to carry on. Now you are doing the same, just in a way that centers your well-being. That shift feels disruptive only to those who assumed your role was fixed. When old agreements break, people may try to remind you of who you used to be, as if memory could bind you to a past you have outgrown. They appeal to loyalty, to history, to sacrifice. But loyalty that requires self-abandonment is not loyalty. It is obligation disguised as virtue. History explains where you've been, not where you must stay. Change clarifies power dynamics. It shows who listened to you because they respected you and who listened because they expected compliance. It shows who celebrates your evolution and who resents it. And once you see that clearly, it becomes impossible to return to old agreements without betraying yourself. Change does not destroy everything, it filters. It removes what was held together by silence, fear, and habit. It keeps what can survive honesty, growth, and mutual respect. The breaking of old agreements is not failure, but evidence that you are no longer living on autopilot, no longer shrinking to preserve comfort that was never truly yours. Self-respect provokes those who preferred yourself, neglect, because there was a time when your exhaustion made them comfortable, when your overgiving reassured them that they would never have to meet you halfway. You were dependable in the way only someone who ignores their own limits can be. You answered every call, absorbed every complaint, adjusted your needs to fit into whatever space was left for you. Your willingness to shrink was mistaken for loyalty, your silence for maturity, your self-neglect for kindness. And while you were busy convincing yourself that this was love, others were quietly benefiting from the imbalance. When you begin to respect yourself, the first thing that changes is not the world around you, but the way your body responds to it. You hesitate before saying yes. You notice the tension in your chest when something feels wrong. You recognize fatigue not as weakness but as a signal. Self-respect sharpens your awareness, and awareness disrupts old patterns. The people who were accustomed to your constant availability start to feel resistance where there used to be access. They may not name it clearly, but they feel the shift. Those who preferred yourself neglect often saw you as reliable because you were predictable. You would show up even when it cost you. You would forgive without repair. You would explain yourself endlessly just to keep the peace. That predictability made life easier for them. Your self-respect removes that ease. You no longer bend automatically. You pause. You ask questions. You decide. And in that pause, discomfort grows for anyone who was used to taking without asking. Self-respect exposes the quiet transactions that were never fair. It reveals how often your generosity was expected rather than appreciated. When you stop overextending, some people feel deprived, as if you took something away from them. But what you actually took back was yourself. Their frustration is not about losing you. It is about losing the version of you that required nothing in return. People who benefited from your self-neglect may accuse you of changing, of becoming selfish, distant, difficult. They frame your boundaries as rejection because boundaries force them to confront limits they never had to consider before. It is easier to label you as the problem than to acknowledge that the dynamic only worked when you were willing to disappear inside it. Self-respect changes the way you speak. You choose clarity over politeness. You stop softening truths to make them easier for others to swallow. You no longer laugh off comments that hurt you. This directness can feel threatening to those who relied on your silence to avoid accountability. Your words are not harsher. They are simply no longer filtered through fear. There is a particular discomfort that arises when someone realizes they can no longer cross a line without consequence. Self-respect draws those lines clearly, not as walls meant to punish, but as markers of where you end and others begin. For people who are accustomed to blurred boundaries, this clarity feels like distance. They mistake your self-definition for withdrawal, because closeness to them always depended on your lack of limits. Self-neglect often masquerades as virtue. You were praised for being patient, for being understanding, for being low maintenance. These compliments kept you tethered to a version of yourself that was easy to manage. When you begin to respect yourself, those same traits are suddenly reinterpreted. Your patience becomes resistance. Your understanding becomes indifference. Your low-maintenance nature becomes expectation setting. The shift in perception reveals how conditional their approval always was. Self-respect forces a reckoning. It asks people to relate to you as an equal rather than a resource. Equality requires effort, consideration, and compromise. Not everyone is willing to make that adjustment. Some would rather resent your growth than rise to meet it. Their discomfort is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that the relationship was built on your self-erasure. When you stop neglecting yourself, you also stop rescuing others from the consequences of their behavior. You no longer smooth over conflicts they created. You no longer take responsibility for emotions that are not yours. This withdrawal of unpaid emotional labor can feel abrupt to those who depended on it. They may feel abandoned, but what they are really experiencing is accountability. Self-respect also changes what you tolerate. You become less interested in explanations that excuse harm and more interested in actions that demonstrate care. You stop waiting for people to change while sacrificing your well-being in the meantime. This refusal to endure indefinitely unsettles those who assumed you always would. There is grief in this process even when it is necessary. You grieve the version of yourself who believed love required endurance. You grieve the relationships that cannot survive your self-respect. You grieve the simplicity of being liked for giving endlessly. But beneath that grief is relief, because self-respect feels like coming home to a part of yourself that was neglected for too long. Those who preferred your self-neglect often confuse your self-respect with superiority. They say you think you are better now, when in reality you simply think you matter. You are no longer negotiating your worth in every interaction. You are no longer seeking permission to take up space. That shift threatens people who felt secure only when you doubted yourself. Self-respect removes the illusion that harmony is always good. You begin to understand that peace achieved through self-silencing is not peace at all. It is quiet resentment waiting to surface. By choosing self-respect, you choose honest tension over false harmony. And honesty, while healthier, is not always comfortable for those invested in appearances. As you practice self-respect, you notice how often you were taught to earn care by being useful. You begin to question why your needs felt negotiable, while others' demands felt urgent. This questioning can make people uneasy, because it challenges long-standing roles. The caretaker stepping back disrupts the entire system. Self-respect also means you stop explaining yourself excessively. You trust your decisions enough to let them stand without justification. For people who relied on your explanations to poke holes, to argue you out of your needs, this silence feels like exclusion. But it is simply discernment. There is a power shift when you respect yourself. Power moves inward. You stop outsourcing your sense of worth to reactions, approval, or validation. This internal stability makes manipulation less effective. Those who once influenced you through guilt or obligation find their tools no longer work. Resistance grows where compliance once lived. Self-respect invites new relationships while ending old ones. It attracts people who are comfortable with mutuality, who do not need you to be smaller for them to feel secure. At the same time, it repels those who thrived on imbalance. This filtering can feel lonely at first, but it creates space for healthier connections. People who preferred your self-neglect may attempt to remind you of who you used to be, appealing to nostalgia as a way to restore the old dynamic. They frame your past sacrifices as proof of your character, hoping you will feel guilty enough to resume them. But self-respect teaches you that past endurance does not obligate future suffering. As you continue to choose yourself, you become less reactive. You no longer rush to fix misunderstandings that are rooted in others' unwillingness to listen. You let discomfort exist without immediately resolving it. This emotional steadiness can frustrate those who were accustomed to provoking reactions to regain control. Self-respect does not make you less compassionate, it makes your compassion sustainable. You learn the difference between empathy and self-abandonment. You care without collapsing. You support without disappearing. This balance is unfamiliar to people who equated your exhaustion with your love. There will be moments when standing in your self-respect feels isolating, when you wonder if it would be easier to return to old patterns just to feel included again. But each time you honor yourself, you reinforce a truth your body recognizes, that you deserve relationships that do not require you to betray yourself. Self-respect is not loud. It does not demand attention. It simply refuses to accept what diminishes you. That quiet refusal is enough to unsettle those who depended on your compliance. They feel the loss before they understand it, reacting with defensiveness, criticism, or distance. Over time, you begin to see that the resistance you face is not a reflection of your worth, but of the cost others must now pay to remain in your life. Some will rise to that cost. Others will walk away. Both outcomes clarify what was always true but never spoken. Self-respect changes the story you tell yourself. You stop framing endurance as strength and start recognizing discernment as wisdom. You stop measuring your value by how much you can carry for others. This internal shift is invisible to many, but its effects ripple outward, altering every interaction. Those who preferred your self-neglect often miss the version of you that needed them. Your self-respect removes that dependency. You relate from choice rather than necessity. That independence can feel like rejection to those who felt important only when you were struggling. Self-respect is a practice, not a destination. There are days you will falter, moments you will overgive out of habit, but awareness changes how quickly you return to yourself. Each return strengthens the boundary between care and sacrifice. As you continue honoring yourself, the noise around you may grow louder before it fades. Resistance often peaks when change becomes undeniable. But beneath that noise is a deeper quiet, one that comes from alignment with yourself. Self-respect does not seek to provoke, yet it inevitably does, because it removes access to what was freely given before. It shifts relationships from entitlement to choice, from expectation to consent, from imbalance to mutual regard. And in that shift, everything that relied on your self-neglect is forced to reveal itself